Welcome back to Gaming Hot Takes, a series where I read your hottest takes about various video games. In today's video, we'll be discussing one of my personal favorite Zelda games, The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. Now, this game is very divisive, so I'm very curious to know how many people have good hot takes, how many have bad hot takes, and everything in between. And of course, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and smash that like button if you love this content and you want to see more of it. And with that, let us get into today's hot takes. I think it's incredibly mid. The overworld is empty, the final boss is predictable, the dungeons are mostly forgettable, and the pacing is awful. So a couple of things here. As I expected, we are starting off with a bad hot take. Not bad as in like it's a garbage hot take, but in like it's a negative one. So a couple things. The overworld, I will agree to an extent, is very empty. It could be a lot more full with stuff to do. That is a common criticism with Twilight Princess as far as why it's not that great. The final boss twist, I wouldn't say... I guess it is kind of predictable because, again, the whole reason why Zant is who he is because of Ganondorf, because Ganondorf gave Zant his dark powers, which let Zant, you know, take over the Twilight Realm and do all that stuff in Hyrule. The dungeons, though, being forgettable, I disagree 1000%. I've said before, and I'll say it again, I think Skyward Sword's a close second for this, but I think Twilight Princess, on a grand scale, like on the grand scale of Zelda dungeons, has maybe the best overall list of dungeons of any Zelda game, because they're all really good. You've got Arbiter's Grounds, you've got Snow Peak Ruins, City in the Sky. Even the other ones are pretty good, like the Forest Temple, the Goron Mines. The Water Temple is alright, I will say. But they're not forgettable at all to me, so I disagree there. The pacing, it is a long Zelda game. Like, most 3D Zelda games, like, have that pacing struggle because they're just long games and long adventures. Not quite as long as Xenoblade, but Xenoblade obviously is, you know, has really good pacing. I can see that argument. I don't know if I fully agree with that, because I feel like the pacing for me was pretty good for the most part. But there might be some parts where, you know, dungeons maybe take too long, or certain side quests are kind of boring, or just going from place to place can be a bit, a little bit slow. So I'm not sure about that, but I'm gonna say half of this I mostly agree with, and half I'm kind of either not in agreement with, or I'm kind of iffy on, but pretty good hot take here. In general, it's a good game, but I do think it's one of the weaker Zeldas. My hottest take is that the story is pretty bad. There are highlights, of course. Midna is a great character, and the game has many epic moments, but it's also bogged down by plot holes, shallow characters, and sluggish pacing. So we kind of touched on the pacing just now. I do agree, maybe to an extent, the pacing could be a bit better. Midna's a great character, definitely agree there. Epic moments, definitely agree there as well. Plot holes, I don't know if there are any that really made me feel down on the game. I guess there are some questions that some story events maybe pose because, like, they don't really solve them that well. They're just kind of complex, but I don't think the game, for me, has any that, like, you know, bring it down for me. Shallow characters, I know some are kind of whatever. I know people kind of hate the kids from the Ordon village. They hate Mallow because of his stupid little face. Some of the bosses maybe aren't the best for them. The story, though, and probably my hot take here, I think Skyward Sword has maybe the best overall narrative. I think TP is probably up there for me. I love Midna's whole story with her, you know, losing the throne to Zant and her wanting to, you know, take over the Twilight Realm, or not Twilight Realm, but Hyrule, and, like, make that into Twilight. We'll get into a hot take a bit later. I think that kind of touches more on Midna, but, yeah, the story for me is definitely not bad at all. One of the weaker Zeldas, definitely don't agree there. It baffles me how there's so many people who will put games like Phantom Hourglass, Triforce Heroes, Spirit Tracks, Zelda 2 above Twilight Princess. Like, no. I like Spirit Tracks for sure, but the other ones, hell no. There's no way. So, one of the weaker Zeldas, absolutely not. Disagree there. But again, another great hot take. I agree with some of this stuff, and some of it I don't. But, again, to each their own. I hate the Ordon Village kids, with the exception of Mallow. So again, we just touched on this, but, I think even Mallow's got, his haters because of his fucking eyebrows and his face. I will admit the kids aren't the best designs. I do like them overall. They have some good moments in there, like, story-wise, especially Colin has some good moments. But it's hard to argue when they could have been, you know, maybe written a bit better and maybe had better, or like better, more iconic designs, I guess, or more memorable ones. So yeah, I don't personally hate them, but I find it hard to argue with those who do, because they do raise some good points as far as why these kids, you know, aren't the best characters and could have been a bit better. It's too easy. Give it a Link to the Past or Ocarina of Time difficulty and it'd be one of the best for sure. So over the years, I've actually kind of agreed with this. I still love the game to death for sure, but I have noticed that it definitely does lean a bit more to the easy side as far as boss fights, dungeons. It is kind of one of the calmer 3D Zeldas, not in terms of like tone or whatever, but as far as like overall enemy difficulty, boss difficulty, dungeon complexity, I have noticed recently that it actually is not that hard. It actually is a pretty overall smooth experience, but I think for me, like, even though that may be true, like, what really sells the game for me is just the tone, the characters, the story. So even if the difficulty maybe is a bit on the easier side, as you mentioned, I don't think that I can see why it might drag the game down for some people who are like into really challenging games or hard games. But for me, like, I'm about how a game makes me feel and how it makes me, like, you know, like my memories of that game. So while I may agree that it is on the smooth, easier side in terms of 3D Zeldas, I think the other things I mentioned are why I love it so much. But I wouldn't argue with you if you think that the difficulty is maybe a down point or a downer if you like prefer the other harder Zelda games. But yeah, I can see your point here, but the difficulty for me didn't affect my me loving the game that much. I prefer Ganondorf being the final boss rather than Zant. So this is kind of a hot one, because I think the majority of people prefer the other way. They don't like that Ganondorf basically kind of casted aside Zant as the final boss. But again, I've raised this point so many times, and I'll raise it here again. Zant is a very cool character. He's a dark character, he's got a great story to him, great personality, but remember, it's said, even like in that cutscene, Zant would not be who he is without Ganondorf. The reason why Zant can do the things he does and take over the throne and, you know, bring ruin to Hyrule is because Ganondorf gave Zant his powers. Ganondorf's power is within Zant. So without Ganondorf's power, Zant is nothing. He is a nothing character. He can't do any of that stuff. He can still be a villain, you know, sure, but like him taking over Hyrule, casting all the Twilight, overthrowing Midna, bringing bosses back to life like Stalwart, like he can't do any of that without Ganondorf's power. So I was fine with it. And again, it's even stated like Ganondorf, in that one other cutscene, he survived the execution that was going to be put on him by the gods because of his Ocarina of Time stuff. So, I kind of expected it. I didn't hate it, but people just did not like that Ganondorf was the actual true final boss over Zant. You do fight Zant, of course, but, like, you think that's the end of the game, right? And it's like, no, Ganondorf's still alive in Hyrule Castle. So, I personally don't hate it. I think it's fine. And again, that boss fight with Ganondorf is fantastic. One of the best final bosses to me in Zelda history. But, again, there's a large group of people out there who don't like that Zant got cast aside for the final boss in favor of Ganondorf. So, I'm on the side of not caring about it, but I'm pretty sure a lot of people would go the other way. Best dungeons in the whole season, and it's not even close. I assume you mean series, not season. And greatest atmosphere in Zelda. So best dungeons, we mentioned that. I definitely agree there. Skyward Sword, again, is a close second. Atmosphere, for sure. Like, I know the art style is kind of muddy these days, but in terms of, like, the atmosphere of certain areas, the Twilight Realm, for example, like, the tone and atmosphere there is gorgeous and beautiful. And even the dungeons themselves, like, I think Forest Temple and Goron Mines have a pretty good atmosphere to them. Snow Peak Ruins being someone's house, and that music really sells that atmosphere. Oh, and the best one by far, even maybe above the Twilight Realm, is City in the Sky, which is the final dungeon before you tackle the Palace of Twilight. That whole entire area, that music, the sounds, just the vibe of it is gorgeous, man. So, yeah, I agree with both of these, honestly. Praise. Midna was a companion done right. I still adore Navi and to lesser degree Fi, but they were very annoying. Midna was done right. Playful banter, helpful mechanics, plus the advice. Yeah, Midna's just great, man, right? Like, Midna to me is the best companion in Zelda, as I am close. I do like Fi and Navi, as you mentioned, but they are a bit over-explaining, whereas I feel like Midna is still kind of explaining, but nowhere, near that extent of, like, being over-explaining. And yeah, playful banter, like, we'll get into Midna, I think we have a hot take coming up that's, like, more so, like, focused just on Midna, which we'll get into, but, yeah, playful banter is one of her greatest personalities, I love that. Helpful mechanics, definitely agree there, and the advice, so yeah, Midna is fantastic. Everything it does great, another Zelda game does just a little bit better. The game's quality lies in the fact that everything is great, but I don't feel it has the highs or lows that other 3D Zelda games have. Other games have my favorite dungeons, characters, story, atmosphere, movement, glitches, central gimmick, etc. It's a jack of all trades, but a master of none. So that's quite the hot take, a lot to unpack here, but yeah, I think you can argue that other Zelda games do certain things that TP does a bit better, like the art style is definitely better in other Zelda games, the controls might be a bit better in other Zelda games, the combat, and again, even the dungeons, like, I think the dungeon list in TP is, like, the best, but Skyward Sword has some fantastic ones as well. So, that's a good point there. But that's what's cool about Zelda is, like, even if you have a favorite Zelda game, there could be parts of it that aren't quite as good as other Zelda games, because the quality is just so good across pretty much the whole series. There are some kind of stinkers in there that aren't fantastic, like Zelda 2, for example. But I think overall, especially the 3D games, like the quality in terms of just certain aspects are just, not, I want to say flawless, but they polish them so well to where, like, you can have a favorite and you can also argue that even though that is your favorite, there might be other Zelda games that do those things better. And that's why I love Zeldas, because, like, I have a favorite, it's Tears of the Kingdom, but I think Twilight Princess has things about it that are better for me than Tears of the Kingdom. But, yeah, that's what's great. Like, you can like certain things and still argue that what you like isn't quite as good as other things in other Zelda games. The atmosphere of the Twilight Realm is gorgeous. Mentioned this earlier, but I definitely agree. The Twilight Realm is a fantastic place to be in, with the orange sky. You got the music, the sounds, the da-dum, and then the ha, the choir in the background. It's a gorgeous place, I agree. I think that was such a great way to, sort of bookend the journey in Twilight Princess. It's not the last area you go to, obviously. You go to Hyrule Castle after that. But it is part of, like, the end game of Twilight Princess, and it is great. Like, just the palace, the outside, seeing the villagers, and just the art there. Even the original version, I gotta say, like, even though the graphics are a bit muddy these days, I think it still looks great for what it is, but, yeah, I adore the Twilight Realm, I always will. It is a gorgeous atmosphere, and, yeah, I could not agree more here. I wasn't a huge fan of how they cast aside Zant for Ganondorf, since Zant was such a great villain. Man, a lot of these are ones we already touched on, which is, a surprise, I guess, but, yeah, we already touched on this. I am of the group that doesn't really care, because I love Ganondorf and Zant. I do love Zant as a character, and I don't think it was a bad idea to, make him, like, seem like the final boss, and then Ganondorf hops in, because again, Zant, I've mentioned this, Zant without Ganondorf would not have what he has, so, I can see why the crowd that hates this hates it, but for me, I didn't mind it, because again, that final boss with Ganondorf was fantastic, one of my favorite fights in all of Zelda, and the Zant fight was cool too, but, yeah, I can see why people don't like it, but for me, as I said earlier, I just don't care, because I think it led to a great final boss fight. Midna is the best companion. Why are so many of these referencing previous hot takes? Like, what? I picked this list. Like, how did I not notice this? But, yeah, again, I'll just go through this one quickly, but, I agree, Midna's great, best companion in Zelda, and we're moving on. The art style has not aged well compared to other games like Wind Waker, and it's kinda ugly now. Again, we mentioned this earlier, like, I gotta, like, pick these lists better, because I picked some that are just, like, kinda copies of other ones, but, yeah, the art style, as I mentioned earlier, has not aged the best. It is kind of muddy now. Even the HD version doesn't look that great. Wind Waker, as you mentioned, looks beautiful these days, even still. But, I don't think that really takes away from the game because it's all about, like, the journey and, you know, the story and the characters. I'm not a big, like, person to, like, criticize graphics because, like, I've played so many games that I personally, like, they're in my top 50 and their art style really isn't that great, but I care more about, like, the story and the characters and the actual gameplay than the graphics themselves. But, I guess some people just care about graphics too much. I don't know, but for me, I was fine with it, because, again, even though there are some things that you can definitely criticize about Twilight Princess that could have been better, like, when you compare it to other Zelda games, I think for me, the highs were so high that it's why I put TP where I do on my, like, top Zelda game list, because even though those things may be true, like the art style maybe looking muddy, and characters being not that great, and, the world being kind of empty, the highs for me are just really, really high in terms of story and other stuff, but, yeah, I agree. Art style is not the best, but there's so much more that TP has that I think is truly great. Alright folks, thank you so much for everyone to send in their hot takes for Twilight Princess, and if you want to send in your own hot takes for a future episode, then follow me on X, Blue Sky, and on Discord, because I am on various Discord servers asking questions in certain servers about various series that you might see me asking. You guys can send in your hot takes, and yeah, hope you all enjoyed. Make sure you guys hit that like button, leave a comment, subscribe, ring the bell, and I will see you guys in the next one. Goodbye, everybody.